Motives, needs, and values. Before leaving the discussion of individual differences and prosocial tendencies, we briefly discuss some other possible sources of these differences. One of these is people's needs or motives. As has already been discussed in Chapter 5, Mark Snyder and his associates proposed a functional analysis of volunteering, in which they suggest that people often act prosocially because it serves some personal or social need. As part of this research program, Cleary et al., 1998, identified 6 motives that they believed represent most people's reasons for volunteering. Other researchers all found significant relationships between one or more motives and some aspect of volunteering. Further, Connell and Penner 2004 and Ryu and Penner 2001 both found that differences in the strength of certain motives are associated with differences in the amount of organizational citizenship people display. For instance, in an organizational setting, prosocial value motives relate to helping individuals on the job, whereas organizational concern motives are associated with behaviors directed at helping the organization. Also, Polyavin, 2005, found that individuals with a long history of volunteering score higher on the Cleary et al. Values motive than those who have volunteered less or not at all. Differences in values are another very likely source of differences in prosocial tendencies. According to Shalom Schwartz, 1994, values are the ideas of what is desirable that guide the way people choose among various actions, evaluate people and events, and explain their own actions and evaluations. People's decisions as to what action they should take reflect the relative importance they place on certain values. One set of values, proposed by Schwartz, is concerned with universalism and benevolence. These values would seem especially relevant for prosocial behaviors. That is, we would expect a person who places great importance on such values would be more prosocial than one who considers these values of lesser importance. However, despite the apparent relevance of values to an understanding of individual differences in prosocial tendencies, there has been almost no empirical work on this relationship. The one exception is a study by Hitlin, 2003, who examined the correlation between the importance placed on certain values and the strength of college students' volunteer role identity. Hitlin found a significant positive relationship between the value of benevolence, as measured by the importance assigned to things such as true friendship, honesty, forgiveness, and helpfulness, and volunteer identity. He also found significant negative relationships between values associated with a desire for power and personal achievement and a volunteer identity. It must again be noted, however, that these findings only showed that certain values and a volunteer identity were related. They did not demonstrate that differences in values caused differences in volunteer identity. Despite this, we would argue that one potentially very valuable line of future research would be to study the role of values in individual differences in prosocial tendencies. Consequences for the helper. Most people assume that both the primary motive for and consequence of helping is to improve the well-being of some person, group, organization, or country that is in need of help, but there can be unintended consequences as well, both positive and negative. Woody Hayes, the legendary Ohio State football coach, once said, "When you throw a forward pass, there are 3 things that can happen, and 2 of them are bad." There is also a variety of things that can happen when a person attempts to help another, and some of them can be bad, for the recipient, the helper, or both. Therefore, we now turn our attention to the effects of helping on the person who helps. First, we consider the emotional consequences of offering help, and we begin with situations where the offer of help is refused. Reactions to spurned offers of help. Sidney Rosen and his colleagues were among the first researchers to study how people reacted when their offers of help were rejected by others. Rosen et al., 1987, proposed that most would-be helpers expect that a person who needs help will accept it from them, and if their offer of help is then rejected, the violation of an expectancy creates tension in the spurned helpers. To test this notion, Rosen et al. Conducted a laboratory experiment in which a confederate either accepted or rejected subjects' offers of help. The helpers' reactions were then measured. Rejection created negative feelings in the potential helpers and decreased their liking for the person who rejected them. The spurned helpers also provided explanations for the rejection, some of which were unflattering to the recipient of their offer, including stubbornness, pride, and lack of trust. These results are consistent with the well-known theory of cognitive dissonance, Festinger, 1957. Specifically, as dissonance theory would predict, the rejected helpers were trying to rationalize or explain away this unpleasant and unexpected outcome. Rosen and his colleagues subsequently applied their ideas about the effects of rejected attempts to help to burnout among people who earn their living as professional helpers, such as medical personnel and teachers. Rosen et al. Linked consistent spurning to burnout in such occupations. They proposed that these effects might be reduced, however, by teaching members of these professions to expect that some people would reject their attempts to help them, and by the development of emotional coping skills to buffer the effects. Reactions when help is accepted. The fact that people react negatively when their offers of help are rejected might lead to the conclusion that they must react positively when help is accepted, but, surprisingly, there is little direct evidence that helping others actually makes the helper feel good. There is, however, a fair amount of evidence that most people believe they will feel better if they have helped others. For example, Harris, 1977, reported that college students she surveyed believed that altruistic actions have a mood-enhancing component. Another study of older adults, 55 to 85 years, who volunteered to work in schools found that 65% of the volunteers reported improved life satisfaction, 76% reported feeling better about themselves, and 32% said that volunteering had improved their mental health. We would point out, however, that in this and many other studies, the major outcome variable has been perceptions of benefits from volunteering rather than actual benefits. The most direct evidence that helping leads to positive feelings comes from a series of laboratory experiments by Weiss and colleagues. These studies demonstrated that being able to terminate shock to another student, clearly helping that person, served as a reinforcer in a classic operant conditioning setting. The faster subjects pressed a button, the sooner the shock was stopped, and the subjects learned to press it faster and faster. The reasoning is that helping in this way must have felt good, or the participants would not have learned the response. They concluded that altruism is rewarding. Weiss et al., 1971. In terms of real-world helping, the only direct evidence of the emotions that following helping comes from studies of blood donation. J.A. Pilyavin and Calero, 1991, measured people's moods before and after they had donated blood. These blood donors included high school and college students and adults from the general public. Pilyavin and Calero consistently found significant decreases in anxiety in all samples, and they also found significant changes in positive mood for the adult samples but not for the students. The authors explained this difference by suggesting that the students were generally in better moods than the adults before they gave blood, and thus it was harder to find an improvement in their moods after donating. In 2 separate samples of high school students who gave blood at least twice, there was a highly significant decrease in nervousness before donation and a borderline increase in warm feelings. More importantly, there were highly significant decreases in pulse rate and systolic blood pressure, physiological measures associated with anxiety. As might be expected, people's feelings when they donated blood predicted the amount they donated in the future. More recently, Nilsson, Sajka, and Sajka, 2003, asked 600 blood donors to answer an open-ended question asking whether the blood donation had any impact on them. 29% spontaneously reported positive effects, including feelings of satisfaction and of feeling better than before the blood donation. Exclusively negative effects were reported by only 19%. That's pretty close to 29%. The positive effects of blood donations often lasted for weeks and persisted much longer than the negative effects. Another way to examine the effects of helping on helpers is to examine how their behavior changes as the result of some prosocial action. In this vein, there is a fairly large amount of research on the long-term effects of volunteering and other forms of community service. The consequences of volunteering. In this section, we address how being a volunteer affects the volunteer's subsequent behavior, involvement in the community, career choices, and mental and physical health. Research concerning psychological well-being, self-esteem, life satisfaction, and happiness has looked at volunteers of all ages, but research on how volunteering affects people's life paths has focused almost exclusively on adolescents and young adults, and the research on physical well-being, including mortality, has focused mainly on older adults and the elderly. This separation by age seems to make sense. Adolescents have not yet developed all of their cognitive and social skills or been socialized completely to their social roles, and their sense of what kind of person they are, their sense of self, is still developing. Thus, community service activities may have the potential of helping them to develop desirable personality traits, skills, and habits, and to internalize helping roles as part of their self-concept. In contrast, the elderly are generally thought of as fully socialized, but potentially alienated from society by virtue of retirement, loss of family roles, and decreasing physical abilities. Thus, the focus of research on the elderly has been not on developmental issues, but on things such as feelings of being part of society, avoiding depression, preserving physical health, and forestalling mortality. Effects of volunteering among adolescents and young adults. Adolescence and early adulthood is often a time of experimentation and rebellion. People in these age groups are more likely to engage in antisocial and deviant acts than are older people. Thus, one question asked by both researchers and people at large concerns what kinds of activities might reduce these tendencies. One suggestion is getting younger people involved in community service, Box 7.1. Box 7.1, Personal Impact of Service Learning on Outcomes Related to Volunteer Motives. Service learning is a specific kind of community participation that combines service in the community with a reflective component. For example, students in a course on the psychology of aging may, as part of the class, volunteer at a local nursing home. They may keep a diary of their activities there, reflect on its significance and relation to the material they are studying, and discuss aspects of what they observed in the class. Many students have had experience with this kind of volunteering. Sukas et al. 1999 concluded that it is the reflection component and the surrounding educational context that serves to highlight the reciprocal nature of the community service activities at the center of service learning programs. In other forms of service and helping, it may not be nearly as clear that both the recipient of help and the helper receive benefits from their partnership. Sukas et al. Framed their review of the literature in terms of their functional approach to volunteering, which assumes that volunteers receive a variety of benefits related to 6 possible goals for volunteering: self-enhancement, understanding of self and the world, value expression, career development, ego protection, and social experiences. They claim that there is evidence for some effect related to each of these motives. Self-enhancement. Service learning can enhance feelings of personal efficacy, self-esteem, and confidence. Understanding. Service learning increases students' appreciation for and attitudes toward diverse groups in society, including the elderly and people from other cultures or races. There can be a backlash, however, if the exposure is too short or if participation is compulsory. Specific learning of course content. The ability to connect academic concepts to real situations. Value expression. Service learning can increase altruistic motivation and social and personal responsibility. Career. Service learning predicts students' academic commitment, importance of career plans, and desire for future community involvement, even when factors related to self-selection were taken into account. Sukas et al. Emphasized 4 features of the programs that appear to be related to positive effects. A. Being autonomy supportive, that is, allowing participants a voice in determining the details of service activities. B. Matching goals and activities, that is, allowing students' needs and interests to help shape the activities so as to contribute to the attainment of goals. C. Paying attention to the relationship among all participants, involving mutual respect among instructors, students, and community participants. And 4. Including opportunity for reflection, which cements the link between experience and theory. Programs such as the Valued Youth Program directly investigated how volunteering can affect antisocial and deviant behavior among adolescents. This program focused on children in middle school in San Antonio, Texas, all of whom had scored below grade level on reading tests. They were randomly assigned to a control group or to do tutoring of other children. These students were compared at the beginning and end of a 2-year evaluation period on grades, disciplinary action, school absences, and school dropout, as well as self-concept and perception of quality of school life. Moore and Allen found lower dropout rates and better reading grades, self-concept, and attitudes towards school among the students who had been assigned to be volunteers. This is an important study because, by using random assignment to the two groups, the researchers eliminated an alternative explanation of the finding, namely, that adolescents who volunteer are less deviant than non-volunteers to begin with. This is called a selection bias, and it is a problem in many field studies of the effects of volunteering, including the next one we discuss. Another program, the Teen Outreach Program, involved volunteer work that was meaningful to students for an average of 31 hours over an academic year, slightly less than an hour a week. The participants were from 11 to 21 years old, an ethnically diverse group, and identified as at risk for problem behaviors, e.g. teenage pregnancy or being suspended from school. The students who chose to work as volunteers and a group of their classmates who did not volunteer were followed for 8 years. Over this time, teen outreach volunteers were somewhat less likely to fail a course or to be suspended from school, and the volunteers had a 33% lower rate of pregnancy and a 50% lower rate of school dropout. Furthermore, the more time the students spent volunteering, the fewer problem behaviors they displayed. This latter finding makes it less likely that the volunteer-non-volunteer differences were an effective selection. Similar results were obtained in a study by Upkin and Janica, 1999. In addition to looking at how volunteering reduces antisocial behavior among adolescents, additional research has explored how it influences other prosocial behavior later in life, e.g., people's willingness to volunteer and engage in other kinds of community activities at a later age. Overall, greater community activism when you are young appears to increase the likelihood of community involvement when you are older. For example, students who volunteered to do civil rights work in the American South in the 1960s were more involved in their community in later life than those who applied but did not go. Also, Fendrick, 1993, found that alumni of 2 universities in Florida who had been active in volunteer organizations and social movements as students were more politically and socially engaged 10 years later. However, these differences were no longer significant 25 years later. Today, many schools require compulsory involvement in some sort of community service program. The effects of such programs on the students who participate in them are mixed. Warburton and Smith, 2003, interviewed students who had been required to do community service and found that, first, the students were bothered by the lack of choice involved in these programs, and that this weakened their sense of control over their own behavior. Second, students in the programs did not develop positive community attitudes or active social behaviors. In fact, such programs may actually weaken the students' citizenship identities, perhaps due to a process akin to the overjustification effect. Stukas et al. 1999 also found mixed effects in an experiment on what they call mandatory volunteerism. Individuals who had volunteered before were not negatively affected by being required to volunteer. However, those who had not previously volunteered were less likely to volunteer in the future. This appears to be an example of psychological reactance, in which people rebel to reassert their behavioral freedom when they believe their freedom of choice has been constrained. Volunteering also relates to later personal accomplishment, such as academic achievement. Adolescents engage in a number of different kinds of volunteering. One of the more common kinds is students tutoring other students with their schoolwork. The goal is to help both the tutor and the learner in various ways, both academic and social. When the tutoring involves reading, both the tutors and the tutees' reading skills appear to improve. Non-academic volunteering appears to contribute to academic and professional achievement. There is, for instance, a positive relationship between volunteering during college and the highest academic degree that people earn. In addition, Wilson and Musick, 2003, studied a group of women for more than 20 years and assessed the relationship between earlier volunteering and subsequent prestige of their occupations. The results of their study are shown in Figure 7.2. As you can see from the figure, in 1973, volunteers and non-volunteers did not differ in the status of their occupation, but by 1991, a strong difference had emerged. The women who volunteered occupied much higher prestige occupations than did the women who did not volunteer. Again, this difference was found even when the effects of factors such as the women's education, IQ, marital status, and number of children were controlled. Figure 7.2, Wilson and Music, 2003, studied a group of women for more than 20 years and assessed the relationship between earlier volunteering and the subsequent prestige of their occupations. In 1973, volunteers and non-volunteers did not differ in the status of their occupation, but by 1991, women who volunteered occupied much higher prestige occupations than did the women who did not volunteer. Okay, so the y-axis is occupational status from 38 to 52, and the x-axis is time from 1973 to 1991, and then one of the sets of dots is did not volunteer in 1973, and the other set of dots is volunteered in 1973. Yeah, so you can see in 1973 the dots converge. In 1977, the people who did volunteer are doing better, then it converges again in 1982, and then it keeps going up again from 1982 to 1991, where the people who volunteered are doing better in their occupational status.